In this video, we are going to talk about herbs for the uterus. I am so excited to be sharing this information with you in particular because it's really my bread and butter, where I got started with herbalism, where I got started with teaching about health. I've been nerding out about this stuff for a long time, and so this video is near and dear to my heart. I am hoping to teach you all the classes and actions of herbs that affect the uterus, uterine health, give you a little bit of tips and tricks on how to approach this part of the body and how to send more love with plant medicine. The uterus is a muscle. Actually, the uterus is a fibromuscular organ. It's an organ, not a muscle. It's made up of 3 layers of smooth muscle. Its size and shape vary widely from person to person, but its function remains mostly the same. To either facilitate the maturation and implantation of a fertilized egg, or to expel it. Of course, the uterus is part of a much bigger, more elegant system that includes the pituitary glands, the ovaries, the vagina, external genitalia, etc. But today we're focusing strictly on it because it presents its own variety of issues and problems that we can address on their own. Issues like cramping, bleeding too much or not enough, or not when you need it to. The uterus can also just become super neglected and need a lot of support, attention, and love, which we can do with herbs. There are lots and lots of botanicals to help support our uterine health. And in this video, we're going to be covering their actions and what we can do to help the uterus with plants. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Hit subscribe. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any more instructional videos about holistic health, hit the notification bell. All right, time to get right into the lesson. So when I think about the uterus and being a better friend to my uterus and having plants be in that relationship, I always think about toning that smooth muscle. Now, bringing a tonic in for the uterus and uterine health can benefit us in a variety of different ways. Actually, when you tone tissue, it is more able to relax. When a tissue has good tone, it functions much better. It is optimized for high levels of circulation. Its nervous system is well coordinated, and we definitely want that for our uterus. There are a couple of ailments that we will want to relax the uterus for: hyperstimulation, cramping, etc. And then some other situations where we may want to stimulate uterine activity. The first thing that comes to mind is expelling placental remains or hastening labor, those types of things. So with that in mind, we're going to get into the herbal actions. The first herbal action, and this is in no specific order, actually I'm going alphabetically, but it's kind of nice to just get this right out of the way, right off the bat, because I know a lot of people have immediate questions about abortifacients. Now, these are herbs that are considered to induce abortion or threaten miscarriage. This comes with a huge warning and caveat. There is no known herbal protocol for home abortions. It's definitely unsafe. Many of these herbs are also teratogenic, which means that they cause mutations in fetal cells, very high in alkaloids, which can be poisonous, potentially toxic to the kidneys and liver. So while you'll see abortifacient herbs listed in like the Materia Medicas, or see this word listed in an herb's actions, it's definitely to be just a good indicator of caution, especially for anybody who's pregnant. If you see this word, that's definitely a good red flag for, for you to avoid that particular plant. The next class of herbs that we ought to consider for uterine health are analgesics. Because so much of uterine issues involve pain, we want analgesics on board to relieve pain through anti-inflammatory actions or through the central nervous system. So we know that there's a lot of nerves that innervate in the pelvis, but then a lot of inflammation can happen in the pelvis as well. And so analgesics, whether applied topically or taken internally, can be very, very helpful to us. So many analgesics that are useful for the uterus are also antispasmodics. Antispasmodics are herbs that suppress or relieve muscle spasms, and uterine antispasmodics, of course, are specific to the smooth muscle of the uterus. Now, these can work by just completely relaxing and being a relaxant to that smooth muscle, or they can help coordinate that muscular activity. This in and of itself is pain relieving, but of course, if we can find herbs that are specific to uterine health but also analgesic, they can really serve during premenstrual syndrome, dysmenorrhea, but also like irritable uterus during pregnancy. Now, aphrodisiacs may not always have direct mechanisms of action to the pelvis, but I like to include them because many of them do. Now, aphrodisiac herbs are thought to increase libido through either increased circulation to the pelvis or nervous system stimulation. So many herbs that have actions on the uterus do both, and which you'll find as you study more aphrodisiacs and more uterine tonics as well. You'll see a lot of crossover. Now, moving on to a class of herbs that aren't necessarily, we've been talking a lot about stimulating and bringing blood flow to the uterus and the pelvic cavity, but astringents are more tonic herbs. They tend to tighten and tone tissues. Whenever we want to reduce irritation and inflammation to the pelvis, this is where we turn to. A lot of tonic herbs, like I said, for instance, red raspberry leaf comes to mind, have mild astringent activities. Some uterine herbs are very, very astringent when we want to, for instance, stop menstrual flow or stop fluid or, bring together or tighten or tone like a boggy uterus is sometimes what it's referred to. The more you study kind of like lax and like deficient uterine conditions, the more you'll learn how astringents can be used to benefit this part of the body. Next, we'll discuss menagogs. Now, these are the herbs that I probably have the most experience with. Menagogs stimulate menstrual flow. These can be very, very useful for missed periods or late periods. I, for a long time, had irregular periods, and I knew, with stress, I would have like a delayed menstruation cycle. And so menagogs became my friend. Now, I want to make a very strong distinction between menagogs and abortifacients. Menagogs stimulate the menstrual flow or the release of the endometrium. They do not end pregnancies, although they are looked to stimulate uterine activity for, completing a miscarriage. Also for releasing placental remains. Sometimes menagogs are used towards the end of pregnancy to stimulate labor, but this really ought to be done with the guidance of an experienced midwife who has long a long time of playing and practicing with herbs. But menagogs are very, very numerous in the plant kingdom, and probably in future videos, if you're not seeing a little flash on your screen right now in the video, I am going to be working on a video on menagogs because they are some of my favorite, lovely, wonderful herbal allies. The next class of herbs that are useful for uterine health are hemostatics. Now, instead of producing blood or producing menses or stimulating the flow, these do the opposite. So they arrest bleeding by either vasoconstriction or by coagulation. So hemostatics can be anticoagulants. They can also be tonics. Tonics tend to kind of constrict tissues. And so, any kind of like cardiotonic can fall into this category if it's specific to uterine health. It's worth noting here that hemostatics are typically used for the uterus during the immediate postpartum stage, so an hour after birth, stage 3 of labor. And there aren't too many of these plants, and I caution, I'm very cautious about recommending any of these herbs. They need to be really, looked after. That knowledge should be really shared by someone who's a very skilled practitioner and knows your health very well. But after a baby's born, we don't have very good clotting factors. And so the uterus is clamping down by vasoconstriction. And so a lot of the hemostatics used in immediate postpartum are vasoconstrictors, which is just an interesting note I wanted to make sure to include for you. The very last class of herbs for the uterus I'm going to cover is oxytocics. So these promote or increase uterine activity to facilitate labor or expel the placenta. And I know that we've talked about this already with the menagogs, but these are just a little bit different in that they actually help a coordinated contraction pattern, whereas the menagogs are working on the pituitary level to oftentimes to release contents. Oxytocics are actually stimulating uterine action to produce contractions that are productive in releasing either placenta or a new baby. These are often used also in home abortion protocols, but as I said, there's not a reliable protocol out there, and so I'm not going to discuss any of those herbs with you. But it's worth knowing that a lot of menagogs are also oxytocics, and there's just so much overlap. It's a very elegant system, and when you play with herbs for the uterus, you will find your own allies. Like I have my 3 herbs that I love and that I turn to, for each cycle, and that work for me. And it's just been a really good pathway to get to know my body and get to know my uterus and my cycles and, lean on plants and the magic and the healing they have to offer me. You guys, this is the place to be for modern holistic health education. Will you subscribe or check out the videos to the side? To which side? I gotta get used to this.